Well, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to apologize. I'm French, so my English is very French English. So I understand that there are some English native speakers here. So please don't laugh too much about my poor English. And I'm not even mentioning my Korean, which will be extremely poor and happily. But you know, after leaving the country, it's a little bit difficult to entertain the Korean, even though I have a lot of interest for this beautiful language. Second, I would like to thank, of course, Mr. Lim, who is whatever he says is so nice and a bit exaggerated, but I use his friendship a bit maybe too much, because I drove him even to Fiji Island to make a conference, and also I was fortunate enough he accepted me to dedicate my book to him, and so somehow implicated you in that book, and so that's maybe, anyway, thank you so much for all your kind words and all your kind friendship since, I think 17 years now, actually, but I have changed, but you haven't. And also thank you very much to Professor Han, because of you now I have a very weird privilege. I think I am the first Frenchman writing upon Korea. There are many French specialists, of course, who are excellent, some still alive, some dead, who wrote very interesting things about Korea, that's sure. But I don't think they were translated into Korean. So I have the privilege of being a French person writing upon Korea, whose book upon Korea is translated into Korean, which could be, it's an honor, of course, an incredible honor, and it could be also a little bit a danger. Some people might think that I'm trying to teach something upon Korea to Koreans, which is, of course, not the case. My main purpose is to be, even more than a researcher, I would say in French, a passeur, some guy who wants to explain or communicate his passion upon Korea and Korean history to the French audience. So that's what I did, and my book was written in that sense. So inside of the book, there are a lot of comparisons with the French system or some European countries, and many allusions to French writers, French newspapers, French formulas, even Victor Hugo, all that kind of people, and also a lot of explanation of things which doesn't need to be explained in Korean. For instance, I need to explain who Tangun is, I need to explain who Lee is, that kind of things, and of course all that things has to be shortened up in Korean, because it would be totally ridiculous. So it was a book made to the French audience to make them understand something else that we usually say in France. The regime is crazy, Kim Jong-un is paranoid, a dwarf, ridiculous, fat boy, and this is all stupid. That's basically what we say about North Korea in the media, and that's what the public opinion think. And I wanted to change that point of view with some kind of a public essay trying to explain that the regime doesn't have to be defended or supported. I'm, of course, not involved in any admiration for the regime, for what he's done to the people, but it has to be explained in its logic and not only considered as crazy. There is a famous book in French written by Andrei Nikolaevich about the absurdity of power. And everybody say, Kim Jong-un, c'est uburois, c'est uburois. That's what they say all the time. And I think this is a bit more complicated than that, and I try to do that in this book. But I have no pretension, and what I'm presenting today for you is, I consider as an incredible luck for me, and I'm so thank you for you to come to listen to what I'm going to say, and I'm sure I will learn more than you will learn. Already with Professor Lankov 2 days ago, with you yesterday, I learned things, and I will certainly use what I learned from you to develop my philosophy, which is presenting Korea to friends. So to escape all those, very, very easy critiques that Kim Jong-un is crazy, Kim Jong-un is absurd, whatever, I decided to refer to one very famous French scholar, Étienne de la Boétie, who wrote an incredible, famous in French essay essai sur la servitude, discours de la servitude volontaire, discourse on voluntary servitude or subjugation. And I thought that even though he's a scholar from Renaissance time, 16th century, he's very useful to try to understand that thing. My book is not about North Korea, it's only about the regime, that absolute power system, why it exists, and why it works. Because we can imagine that after a decade, some people cannot accept that total absolute power, but no, it still works. And there is no real clue to let us think that it will stop soon. That's what Professor Lankov said 2 days ago. We can imagine that it will happen and the dynasty will collapse, but it's not likely to happen. So,
eventually long run.
Yeah. So the question is it legitimate to use such a scholar? I think yes, of course I did. So I try to legitimate, but yes, because his thought is follow us until 20th century even. And you are specialists about Habermas. I don't know what Habermas said, but Foucault, for instance, referred to him quite often as interesting and new problematic. Foucault referred to La Boétie. So the French theory still used that guy. So I think it's possible to use him. And also another thing is maybe useful to use a Renaissance writer to bypass the problem and the danger which is always around North Korea, is using modern ideology. So referring to the Marxism, referring to the anti-communism, referring to the Cold War. Of course, maybe there won't be North Korea if there were no Cold War. That has to be proven. But is there any relation with Marxism or communism? Maybe, but this is not the only thing. And in France, there's a huge school of scholars who say the regime, Kim dynasty, is the Stalinist system, and then it proves that the communism is bad. Okay, maybe, but when they say like that, it means that they think we have to fight against communism in France. That's what they mean. And a very powerful communist party until the 90s. And that school is finished because now in France there is no communist party. Now it's 1%. They totally disappear. But until there, they really think about that. The North Korea is communist, so it's bad because communism is bad because we have to get rid of communism in France. So in going by La Boétie, through by that way, we avoid that kind of danger of recuperation, political recuperation. The second idea is also, okay, I know that Korea is very special, very unique, and I like this uniqueness. But I'm sure there are a lot of links and comparison possible. Somehow your history is universal, like French history or British history or German history is. We can make comparisons through time, through space. It's possible. I also made a history of Korea for the French audience, and I allow myself to make many comparisons. Maybe it's a bit easy, but it's also something which make people understand and create some links and correspondences between events, fact, and phenomenon through space, through time, and I think it's legitimate. We can do that. Then, using a French scholar of 16th century to understand modern Korea of 21st century is not totally scandalous. I think it's a possibility. That's the first thing, the first comment I wanted to do. And just before starting, I would like to tell you the most famous sentence which is always quoted referring to this book. It's not necessary to do it in French, but the question Étienne de la Boétie raised at the beginning of his book is, how is it possible that so many men, so many cities, so many nations sometimes accept a lonely tyrant whose power is only given by them? Is it a surprising and yet common thing to see millions of men submitted because they are fascinated and, so to speak, bewitched? Such is the weakness of men. So he insists about the power to the exactly opposite idea of Niccolò Machiavello, Machiavello is only interested in the power itself, how to manage the power, how to keep it, how to conquer it, how to manage it, how to keep it. That's some kind of recipe book to keep the power. What has a prince to do to keep his power? But La Boétie is the contrary. Why it works? Why people accept? Why they don't see that the prince, in the Machiavello sense, manipulate them? Why they accept that? And the title of his discourse, the only thing he wrote in his life, because he died very young actually, is voluntary subjugation. It looks like an oxymoron, you know, something which is not possible. How can you accept voluntarily to be a slave? But he tried to explain with many reasons why it works, why we accept to be subject, to be slave in front of power. And we can make many examples, but finally there is 4 categories I keep in the book, and to develop the history, because my book is also biography, compare biography between the 3 tyrants of the family. There is a chapter, one part upon Kim Il-sung, one Kim Jong-il, one Kim Jong-un. I follow the history, but every time I try to underline why it works, why they can stay in power, and why they're still there and loved. And it's a question everybody asks, actually, and many people say because Koreans are special. In France, they say because Koreans are Confucianist. That explains everything for them. It doesn't explain anything. Because they are stupid. No, they are not stupid. So I think we can use the La Boétie idea to explain why it works, why that voluntary subjugation. There are, I think, 4 points I would like to develop in front of you. The question of violence, the question of the habit of history, the question of what I could say, dictatorship show business, the spectacle of to fascinate the audience, and 4th point, the pyramidal structure of the tyranny. So first one, violence. Of course, North Korea is a violent regime. There is no doubt about that. We know that there are concentration camps, that people are afraid to be sent there, they're afraid to be executed, that they're afraid about the police, and the police which watch the police, and the special police which watch the police which watch the police, and they are afraid by a spy system everywhere, they're afraid by threat, they're afraid by the condition of living. They're living in fear, that's sure. But it's not enough to explain why the dictatorship, the Kim dictatorship works. Violence is one thing, but if there's only violence, actually the regime would need almost 1 policeman or 1 military behind every citizen. And I'm sorry, but it's impossible. There are 24 or 25 million people. They're not 12.5 million policemen watching the other part of the country. There is something else. In the French audience, in French opinion, when the North Koreans are gathering to Kim Il-sung Square to worship the atomic test or the missile launching, they are sure that the policemen everywhere with guns saying to the people, "Say manze or kill you." It doesn't exactly work like this. So I think the violence has to be understood another way. And the way the La Boétie use the term violence is very interesting. For him, violence is not only the violence you inflict to terrorize people. It's also some kind of attitude and feeling which widespread in the whole society. Everything is violent. The violence is channelized by other aspects. For instance, the military, how can I say, subjugation. Everybody has to go to army, everybody has to entertain, use weapons, to be in military outfit. There are posters everywhere with soldiers threatening the enemy for fighting against any invention. They are fist, killing the enemies. When the Washington says something the regime doesn't like, they show the destruction of the White House by Korean rockets. There is some kind of culture of violence within the army, and army is very important. We know that North Korea is an army which controlling a society, and maybe an army of resistance. It's the case since the Baekdu time, when Kim Il-sung was in the resistance. The violence also can be channelized by the sport, and we know how sport is important in North Korea. And I have some, maybe totally wrong, but I have some theory. We know that Kim Il-sung launched the Chollima movement. And every time you read about that, they say, oh, Chollima is an allusion to the Koryo time Pegasus. I'm sure it's true. But also the football team is called Chollima. So I wonder if it's not an allusion to the sport, to the football. We have to be a football team. We have to be as strong as a football team. And sport is, we know in Korea, is extremely violent. At the end of the match, they hit each other. Sometimes there are people die after the match because they fight like hooligans. So as sport is channelized violence in all the regime. And now we praise Kim Jong-un because he opened many swimming pools. And he visits swimming pool with toboggan and young people, they're so happy. But they all, when you watch, they all in taekwondo position when he's there, looks with a lot of muscles, and it's not, cool swimming like imagining, laying down to the beach. It's a strong swimming to be strong kunin somehow, something like this. So violence through sport, violence through image, and even the products for the kid, what is Grimcheck? It's a lot of soldiers fighting. I know there's one famous one about the king of bees. He's fighting against the ants, and he's in military outfit, and so there's always a culture of violence in this country. So the regime is violent because he terrorized the citizen, but also because he used violence to create a state of mind of permanent mobilization, violence, and that's the way the system works. The regime creates a violent civilization of permanent mobilization, and that helps the dictatorship to hold in place. La Boétie say even the tyrant himself is victim of its own violence. And if what we say about the Kim family is true, always changing palace because there's a risk of being killed, always going in car with double or triple window and even iron to be sure not to be killed. They live in some kind of, okay, the word is a bit wasted, but paranoia of being killed and destroyed. Themselves live in violence and they inflict violence, and that's one of the way I think we can understand why this regime works. Tyranny goes on violence, and this regime is especially use and channelize violence. Second is importance of habit. Habit is important for mankind, and dictatorship lays on habit. If you experiment democracy, it's difficult to go back to dictatorship. I think so. The contrary, if you never experiment democracy whatsoever, you are used to the absolute regime. And the history of Korea, North Korea, is permanent dictatorship from the beginning, the creation of the first Korean kingdoms, until the Japanese domination, which was some kind of terrible dictatorship, a cultural genocide somehow, and then immediately Kim Il-sung arrived and established a dictatorship. Since 1946 already, there are statues of for his glory posted in his first school, Mansongdae, and then people never experiment anything else that absolute power. So it's very difficult to change, and they don't even imagine to change. If I made the comparison with the French system, We were in absolute monarchy, more and more absolute monarchy. We have the revolution, we behead the king, and what happened? Okay, Louis XVI was executed in 93. 7 years later, we have a more absolute monarchy than ever, Napoleon, and then another king, and then another king, then a revolution, and then a king, and then a revolution, and then an empire again. And finally, because all the king happened not to be good and not to be fitting the needs, we go to republic. And even in 1940, again, we have some kind of dictatorship. The Vichy regime was some kind of dictatorship. So it's very difficult to go to democracy. And that's the reason, I think, for North Korean, even though they must know democracy exists, I'm sure they study what is a democracy, they haven't experimented it. When I know the Koreans are very easy learners. When they experiment something, they adopt it if they like it very fast. I'm very impressed by the way South Korea became a democracy from '88 and want to remain a democracy, and according to my feeling is a democracy, even though there are some critics about it could be more democratic, but anyway, it's very democratic. Actually, in France, we call South Korea the small, cool democracy of North Asia. That's true. It's a small country, cool, because Korea looks very cool for the moment, for the young people, and it's a democracy. You experimented democracy, in North Korea they haven't, so why they fight for something they don't even imagine? I think it's very difficult. The second is the changing of history. The power of the regime is to use the history. I think they use their history as incredibly more than any dictatorship, but in rewriting the history. As you know, everything is rewritten. The history of North Korea is very simple. There is before Kim Il-sung and after Kim Il-sung. Everything goes to prepare the apparition of Kim Il-sung. And now everything goes from Kim Il-sung onwards, and that's why they create Juche era, and that's why they create many myths, like the grandfather of Kim Il-sung was the first resistant against the American invasion in 1876. When the Sherman boat goes to the Taedong River, they manipulate history. I think there are Kim Il-sung-ism class for the young student. They learn the thought of Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il. They transform the history to make the Kim family being the Korea. Korea and Kim family is the same thing. So the destiny of the Kim family is the destiny of Korea, and vice versa. So then it's very difficult to get rid of them. If you get rid of the regime, you get rid of Korean history. And I have another hypothesis I would like to present in front of you, is the use of the Tangun myth. Tomorrow is Tangun Dal. Tangun myth is the Paekdu. Of course, we know Kim Il-sung did everything in the Paekdu, the resistance, whatever. We know that baby Jesus, Kim Jong-il, was born in a small house like baby Jesus, not in Bethlehem, but on the Paekdu-san, which is not totally sure, but anyway, they say like this. Even the Albi tried to say that the mother of Kim Jong-un was anyway very close to Paekdu when he was born. They are the Paekdu people. We talk about the Kim Il-sung Nara, but also the Paekdu Nara, and we called about the holy blood of the Paekdu to talk about the family. As I read the sentence in the party, the Labour Party, saying the general secretary of the party has to be chosen according to the holy blood of the Paekdu. So they are the people of the Paekdu. See, if they are the blood of the Paekdu, it means that they are hair of Tangun. Okay. What I'm very surprised is the role of Ryukyong Hotel. You know, that gigantic hotel which dominates Pyongyang. It's impossible not to see. Every South Korean movie trying to represent Pyongyang always put the Ryukyong, but graphic thing. It's very funny. It's the Eiffel Tower of the Pyongyang now, somehow, more than the Juche Tower. And that Ryukyong, but I'm sorry, but this is the character of mountain and of a mountain. And what is that Ryukyong? Why they build? Because the mother of Kim Jong-il said, please build a gigantic hotel in shape of a mountain in my city. Okay, he did. So Kim Jong-il built a mountain in the city. for me, it's the Paekdu. They bring the Paekdu in the Pyongyang. They make their modern Paekdu. They dominate the city. They are the Ryukyong. Ryukyong is the Paekdu, is themselves, is their power, and it dominates everything. Very often, dictatorship build gigantic monuments to prove, to show their immortal power. They built a new Paekdu in Pyongyang, so they are the history, they are Korea, they are Tangun, they are Korea from the beginning until the end, so why get rid of them? It's impossible. So that's the second aspect, important of habit and important of history. Third one is the show business. I could say the tyrannic show. Okay, needless maybe to come back to all what you know, mass games. Absolutely obvious that the mass games are at the glory of the regime. The sport, I already mentioned. The movies, all the classic movies that Kim Jong-il made when he was somehow the Ministry of Movies in Korea. There's some kind of opera singing movie thing with extremely famous actresses. I've heard that on the banknote is only portrait of the Kim and some important actresses. So there's also a cinema dictatorship when cinema was very important. Then it became a little bit television. I've heard that there is one drama everybody wants to see in North Korea is Halasan, because also the mother of Kim Jong-un is supposed to come from South Korea and from Jeju Island, so there's an allusion of that. Television, and now, that's what you're going to say, Professor, new technologies. All the new technologies exist. They have telephone, they have some kind of internet, they have video games, they have PC bank. Just they change the name, of course, it all become Kwangmyongsong system or whatever name system, allusion to the dynasty, but it exists. Everything is a show business, and is a permanent show. The regime show all the time what he is, how it works, how the dynasty helps or doesn't help the country. Is fundamental. They are everywhere. They are a bit like Big Brother in the famous Orwell novel. They are watching you, you watching them. There's a permanent dialogue between any citizen of North Korea and the supreme leaders. The pin system, the portrait everywhere. They are everywhere on television. They're on banknote. They're on the newspapers. It's a permanent. They show themselves all the time. They show the dictatorship all the time, and that's also a way of fascinating the people. You are fascinated by your idol, and but the idol in the south they exist, but they change all the time. As soon as they get a bit old, we change. But there's the same idol all the time. They never change, and I'm sorry, but it makes a bit looking like fascism. Mussolini was everywhere, show his power everywhere, put himself in the action. Oh, sorry, I have to be fast all the time. And last one is just to say a word. Even that the spectacle of the terror they use now for the international audience. I was very astonished that they show the killing and the execution of Chang Song-taek in direct. It's a way to create some kind of Shakespearean show even abroad. Now everybody is fascinated by North Korea, even his horrible and bloody crime. The assassination of Kim Jong-nam was fascinated also for the And the last one is the pyramidal structure. The tyranny works because not all power is concentrated on the hands of Kim Jong-un, but there are many petit changunim, small changunim under him who have power. Like the comparison can be done with the Nazi Germany. Now we know that the Nazi Germany is totally delegated. There is the Führer, Hitler, and as the Reichsführer underneath, and small Führer, Oberstammführer. There's some kind of delegation of tyranny at 10 or 11 levels, which create in Germany somehow a global tyranny. Of course, Hitler is absolute master. He can kill whoever he wants, decide whatever he wants, and lead Germany to the total destruction. And under him, many people profit about that regime to have power, to make fortune, to decide whatever they want, and some escape to the end of Nazism to become a modern German politician. And I have the feeling that North Korea works the same way, which means it's a collective tyranny which maybe concerns 15, 20%, and that's why it works. Many people have interest into the tyranny because the tyranny make themselves small and delegate, sub-delegate, sub-delegate tyrant. Of the Kim dynasty make the country as a country of tyranny, a small tyranny. Not everybody, of course, many people suffer, but there's enough amount of tyranny to make the system works. So that's what all the Laboissy explained. That's what I use, and that's, I think, try to explain why somehow North Koreans suffer about what we call the Stockholm syndrome. Why they love so much the people who take them into hostage. I think the habit, I think the violence, I think the fascination by the show, fascination with races, with new technology, and the delegation of tyranny explains why this system works and why it will be difficult to get rid of it. He maybe will disappear. I think we all hope it will, but for the moment it holds, and there's no significant sign which shows that it will disappear soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Actually, this seminar has been co-organized by Professor Ji-hyun's institute. I don't know whether it's the correct name, but anyway, it's the institute. And the institute that I am representing, Jumin Institute or Jumin Foundation for Social Theory. And I'm so glad that we work together for this seminar this afternoon. And I'm also very much appreciative. Now I call you my friend, my friend Pascal Dayez-Burgeon, who come along the long way from Europe to join our conferences. Well, I have learned a lot from him when I was translating his book in Korean. And I was particularly fascinated by the idea of voluntary subjugation. That was something different what we used to hear about North Korean problem. We always say about this indoctrination, political terror, and massive, human rights violations. So it's kind of survival issue. So one has to survive. Therefore, somehow, they accept involuntarily, they accept the power of North Korea rather than voluntary acceptance, something like that. So, yes, of course, there are many reasons to think that way, but nonetheless, somehow he suggested it is too narrow concept of what we could observe from North Korea. So he suggests kind of this interesting idea of voluntary subjugation out of a French kind of also very interesting tradition, I think. And then I thought it may represent one of the many interesting puzzles that we see from North Korea. Why voluntary subjugation, despite political autocracy? And then somehow I thought, look what's going on in North Korea. Then I see recently very interesting trend. They put a lot of emphasis on developing science technology, particularly digital technology. And it has enormous political consequences, of course. So I'm a sociologist. I'm studying the process of modernization in many different parts of the world. And it is very strange to see North Korea put such kind of enormous policy orientation as well as kind of emphasis overall scientific development at this stage, because North Korea is still a very poor country, very kind of backward, economically backward country. According to many statistics that I show in my paper, as of 2017 or 16. There's some sources of it. The per capita GNP or GDP, HNI per capita is just less than 5% of South Korea. I don't know whether it's true or not, actually. It's extremely difficult to make a very reasonable comparison. But anyway, they said it's so kind of backward if we compare North Korean economy with the South Korean economy, then we can say that it's far, far lagging behind the South Korea and among the socialist country too, Right. So why digital drive? That was kind of question that I had, and I thought, why don't we put these two questions, voluntary subjugation and the digital drive, as a two puzzle that we need to think about in connection to each other rather than as a separate, phenomenon. So that's why I wrote this paper, but I frankly admit that it is the paper that I wrote first time. I have never written anything about North Korea so far. And digital revolution, of course, I'm interested in, but I have never written anything about the digital problem of North Korea. So it is just kind of working paper, I just put forward what I just learned. I don't claim any originality at all. I base myself on several kind of available evidences and the research that I collected so far. But I really tried to relate Pascal's thesis of a voluntary subjugation to what I observed this digital drive in North Korea, how they could be related to each other, what might happen in the future in terms of this political development of North Korea. That's my concern. And for me, well, I was introduced here as specialized in Foucault and Habermas. Yes, that's true. I started from those theory when I wrote my dissertation a long time ago, 1979. But at the same time, I have been doing a lot of research on the historical process of change, particularly democratization and industrialization of different parts of the world. And also, I spend a lot of time in studying Latin American development, And therefore, I am a bit familiar with the thesis related to modernization, dependent theory, or world system theory, something like that. Now, if we just go back to the starting point, it has been said that there are many tracks of modernization, And one track is, of course, those countries who took initiative as a beginner, first to come, England, United States, that's the first to come. Usually, it's said that a bourgeois class was formed as a kind of promoter of industrialization, and eventually it works as a prime actor for democratization. Okay, that is a very much step-by-step, internally oriented mode of development based upon the first-comer experience, particularly England, United States, Australia, this kind of thing. But many kind of the country or the region cannot follow that pattern because, simply speaking, they don't have any independent bourgeois class to begin with. Okay, in that case, the most important condition for modernization or development is whether or not a country has a very strong, very competent, bureaucratic state or not. That is a very important condition. That's Gershon-Kron's very famous thesis. He identified the three different routes: first-comer, late-comer, and the late-comer. And the representative of a late-comer is, of course, Germany, Japan, Soviet Union, this kind of country. And the late-comer, there are a whole bunch of late-comer, but South Korea is one of the very well-known examples of a late-comer together with many big countries of Latin America, like Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, late-comer. And whether we take this late-comer or late-comer, the key condition is the existence and the function of very strong, centralized, capable, efficient, bureaucratic state. Okay, that is the condition. And we did have it. Korea, we have very strong state. And also, it took good choices about the policies, and somehow we were able to modernize in a very short span of the time. And eventually, we were also successful in carrying out democratization because, simply speaking, we were very successful in modernization by putting a lot of emphasis on large-scale industry. Okay? Big company. The big company means increase of not only skilled worker, but also a lot of white collar. White collar classes, they increase very much. Okay? They have higher education, they have good inspiration of their own freedom, but the bureaucratic authoritarian regime was very efficient in promoting economic growth, but nonetheless very much suppressive. You know? It suppresses human rights, it closes down communication, and it very much bureaucratic. So in this context, this emerging middle class, particularly well-educated kind of white-collar middle class, were very much this illusion of this political reality of bureaucratic authoritarianism. So they took some initiative in promoting freedom, basically, okay, human rights. And that is exactly what happened in Korea. But the South Korea was very successful in the sense it's somehow able to coordinate diverse social forces, bottom-up social forces, into a pragmatic idea of step-by-step democratization process. It is a very wonderful case in the world, I guess. Now, what about North Korea? That's my point. And when we think North Korea as a just kind of backward country whose GDP per capita is just less than 5% of South Korea, that is, yes, maybe, that may be true. But that is just one aspect of it. If we think North Korea is just backward, I don't think it is a true idea. If we say North Korea is just a failed modernization, I think it's too much exaggeration. So why? If we go back to original thesis of existence and the function of strong state, we can say North Korea developed very strong state. After all, this state could be called the Stalinist state. Here's Lankov's idea. Stalinist state eventually failed to work out that dream, but it's a very strong, very capable state. 1940s, 1950s, even 1960s, we can say this state was very capable, efficient, in drawing resources and putting forward, the economic development. So there are many evidence which say that North Korea was advanced than South Korea up to the end of the 1960s. Somebody said even up to the middle of the 1970s, something like that, in terms of the income, the GDP per capita. But I said, it's extremely difficult to make a good, reliable statistical data. So what I'm saying is this North Korea was also in possession of strong central government as South Korea. But nonetheless, I put emphasis in my paper about the specific kind of orientation or collective mentality prevailing in North Korea from the beginning. That is kind of very high level of sensitivity against colonialism. Against colonialism. So even today, when we go out to the international conference, a lot of people from what we call Global South, Global South, kind of Latin America, Africa, or Southeast Asia, they are always talking about this colonialism. Western modernization is only one side of it, but they have accompanied the process of colonialization and imperialism, dependency, and therefore the backward stage of third world or the global south is not accident at all. It is inevitable consequences of the rapid development of the first world, Western world. So this kind of discourse is very prevalent even today. But North Korea, they are very sensitive from this idea of kind of colonialism, which means that they always think that the most important thing for them to do is to keep, protect, make it sustainable, a strong state they created out of this process of revolution. Of course, there's a Kim Il-sung state. There are many names by which we can understand this strong state. But however we call them, the fact is that the kind of state that we saw from North Korea was as capable, perhaps more capable in that particular historical context than South Korean government, in terms of promoting economic development and social integration and kind of ideological campaign, Juche ideology, and this kind of thing. So what I'm saying is North Korea is I call North Korea as a delayed modernization. Delayed means not failure. Delayed means very kind of imbalanced, kind of twist type of modernization, very strong development of certain sector and very backward sectors on the other hand. Fourth example, military is very strong there. Even atom bomb represent for them a kind of power, state power. So armed modernization, military expenses, and the military as such is very strong and is a part of the state. And they put enormous emphasis on developing this sector with the belief that it is important to keep the state safe from the possible external threat coming from colonialism. In the past, the enemy was Japan, but today, for a long time, it is the United States. So therefore, they said we have to do everything, first of all, to keep our state safe from those possible external infiltration. And so therefore, they actually mobilized all the resources for military modernization, first of all, bureaucratic, maybe overdevelopment, which turns out kind of systematic sacrifice of the general welfare of the people. That is what we see in North Korea today. So this is what I call delayed modernization. And this delayed modernization actually means poor performance of economic industrialization. The general welfare of the people is so backward. And in that context, what does digital drive really mean? Usually digital drive comes up in certain process of industrial development. For example, in South Korea, digital revolution or IT revolution began to take place at the end of the 1990s by our former president Kim Dae-jung and his administration. They say we have been lagging behind in industrialization. We were late in industrialization, but we should move forward in IT revolution. Okay? So as a response to economic crisis, Asian economic crisis, the government really did a lot of things, put enormous resources there, and the people were very much eager to follow that because, after all, under the influence of Confucianism, people do not want to be lagging behind. They want to go beyond. They want to go first rather than they don't want to find themselves, lagging behind. Actually, very much competitive people. I think South Korean and the North Korean people are same. They are very much competitive people. They don't want to find themselves lagging behind, okay? So they adjust to themselves. So people somehow very aggressively accepted this trend of IT revolution, and we became very super country, actually, digital super country, superpower. in the world today. This is the natural because we follow the certain process. We followed the heavy and industrialization policies during the 70s, and we went through step-by-step liberalization policies, and eventually we come up with the industrial revolution, the IT revolution, digital revolution after 21st century. So in that context, this IT revolution could be expected because it has a good kind of linkage effect. Okay? Backward, forward, the linkage effect can be established by developing this IT sector. What about North Korea? We don't have that kind of industrial basis at all. Why only digital? And it is what happened actually in North Korea, particularly by Kim Jong-un. His first message after he became powerful man of North Korea, and okay, we should develop science and technology, and he was putting a lot of drive to digital kind of development. And why is it so? What is the consequences? And I suggest here, my paper, some evidences actually. Only some evidences which I collect here and there, which show how dramatic this kind of digitalization is going on in North Korea. But again, it's extremely difficult actually to know the real situation. I feel some are very much exaggerating, but overall, nevertheless, it seems to me very clear that something unusual is going on in Korea. A lot of people are using smartphone, and then they are using IT instrument, and they are also very much competitive in using that. Particularly younger generation college students, there are good evidence saying that they just are not exactly the same college student in South Korea, but it's more or less same tendency we can find among North Korean college students. And for some reason, it will likely that North Korea will put more and more emphasis on this digital development. Okay. So this is my second part, the digital drive. What is going on here? Now, what is the consequence of this digital drive? Political implication. Now, Pascal suggests the 4 reasons. Makes sense. Okay, you said you can explain this voluntary subjugation of North Korean people by these 4 items. Okay. Now I'm thinking, okay, that's okay. But nonetheless, another question is, well, in order to speak of voluntary subjugation, we should pay what is really meant by voluntary. Voluntary means that it's meaningful. Okay? If it is not meaningful, if I do not think it is meaningful at all, it cannot be voluntary actually. It's a forced, one over the other. It's a forced or manipulated, constrained, whatever, however you may call it. It is not just a voluntary. When we use the term voluntary, means that I am willing to follow certain day, whether I am correct or whether I have the good sources of judgment or not. That's another story, okay? That could be distorting, but nonetheless, at least my intention is concerned. When I say voluntary, then I am willing to follow that. That means very normative. Voluntary is a very normative concept. Okay. I follow that because I think it is right. Simply speaking, I think I follow it because it is correct. I follow it because it is what I should do. Something like that. Not just I follow it because I want to survive. It is not voluntary at all. Yeah. I support it just as a kind of opportunistic adjustment. Okay, I have no other choice, so I have to follow it. That is not really voluntary at all. That's why we use the term voluntary. I mean, voluntary theory in sociological theory is very important. What do we mean by voluntary? And it has something to do with culture, I mean, you said many things about the culture, so could be voluntary. I mean, if you say it comes from Dangun, whatever, okay, it's a good aspect of voluntary. Okay? But for me, we should put more emphasis on this kind of the true meaning of a voluntary. And then I said something about what I learned from Max Weber, because Max Weber was trying to show this voluntary aspect of social order, authority, power relations in history. Okay? Max Weber just rejected Marxism, not any kind of technical, no, he doesn't reject. In terms of the interaction of the people, he tried to find out what is the normative basis of social order, and this kind of idea can be, of course, applied to North Korea. Then what does it mean? Somehow, this digital drive somehow indicate the following thing for the North Korean people. As far as I can see, because they put more emphasis on the importance of sovereign state as a condition of freedom, okay, or prosperity, whatever, autonomy. That means they are very much collective orientation. Collectivist in a sense, the value of collective consciousness is very strong. There is not much play of individualism as we do find in South Korea, but they are more or less collectivist in a way. Okay, that is one factor. And also, this digital device show very much kind of vivid facial and all kind of image politics, which show how the leaders can behave in the first, person-to-person relationship. Mass media cannot do so, but this digital media could bring the leader in a very direct interaction with the audience, as if this reader can be a friend, sharing the same emotion in a very natural way. And it is well known about this particular impact of digital devices upon human interaction, which deeply affect not only human cognition, but affection. Yeah, they deeply affect human affection. And we can easily imagine that North Korea, for example, developed atom bomb. Kim Jong-un negotiate with Trump on an equal basis. It never happened before. And this digital device show this very vividly, and show Kim Jong-un and Trump, and then the people see, look, wow, simply speaking, wow, this is our great leader. Wow, North Korea is powerful country because North Korea is competing with United States. We do have nuclear bomb. And they think the nuclear bomb was very important because Japan simply surrendered by these 2 nuclear bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So nuclear bomb is a symbol of modernity, power, strong state, and they said so always. Okay, now North Korea is a very strong country. And then if the people have more individualizing tendency or individualization, this kind of orientation, maybe we can say cynical, it's not my business. This our welfare in our everyday life is more important than the aspect of state power. But they are very different, for some reason. So because of this collective orientation, somehow this digital device help promote very naturalistic kind of image of leadership as well as the country to support their unconscious, maybe not unconscious, but a collective kind of image of a strong state. And therefore, it will help strengthen the political leadership It could be. So I suggested some good references to think in that way, particularly John Thompson, who is studying about mass media, particularly digital technology at Cambridge University in Great Britain. I know him very well. And he said very beautiful things in his writing recently, and even in his writing in 2018, something like that. So I thought it shows good, a very interesting dimension of how power works today in a very different way from previous time, like by mass media, but it is digital media helps create a new dimension of interaction between leader and follower, creating kind of very intimate friendship, maybe kind of emotion, emotive relationship. Emotive relationship. This is one thing. And the other thing is, nevertheless, I suggest here, the idea of digital subject. Digital subject has two aspects, okay? One is exactly what I said, okay? Personally, our subject is deeply, more and more deeply kind of invited and immersed into this image politics created by digital technology. That's one thing. So in that sense, we can talk about, of course, Foucault. Okay, disciplinary power, subjugation is working. But digital power also means not only that. Digital power somehow indicates that another angle which we could better explain in terms of flexibility. Because digital subject somehow means I am I, but I am not a kind of integrated personality. I am composed of many data file. Okay, I am having many different parts in my body. So the traditional idea of a human being as being a very unified, autonomous people is not useful for them. We are just fragmented. Human beings are very much fragmented, so we acting in different way according to this data file which is working inside me. So this is the digital stuff. If we follow that idea, it is not possible to assume an individual completely subjugated. So therefore, practically speaking, I think we can say in this way. On the one hand, for some reason, for value orientation and technology, voluntary subjugation, as Pascal has described, they may work even more fundamentally, assisted by digital technology, digital drive. That's one aspect. But at the same time, I think it is possible to say that people begin to find themselves not only as part of a collectivity, but as an individual. There are many reasons to think so. They think themselves more as an individual than in the past. As an individual, we may say, look, I use this digital device, notebook, whatever, smartphone, something like that, as a part of a communication with other people, but at the same time, I do what I want. Sometimes I don't want it, they don't want it, So in that case, some argue that young people today in North Korea, they don't listen too much about this political campaign at all. They don't listen to that. Bullshit, okay, that's what they say. But they are more concerned about their everyday life. So by using this smartphone or other devices, they already calculate what is the price of certain items in the market, where should go to buy where, something like that. So everyday life is more important for them to survive. So in this sense, there is some distance. Okay? This public political arena of communication and this everyday life, and seems to me there seems to be this discrepancies of this sphere is increasing rather widely as time goes by under the condition of North Korean political system. So in this sense, we should not too much exaggerate, kind of subjugation aspect. So if voluntary subjugation, we should admit certain level of reflexivity on the part of the individual to get away from this dominant trend of political power or whatever, authority, subjugation. I don't know whether I make sense. So that's just what I try to say. But again and again, this is just draft paper. I want to expand it more to develop rather more solid, argument later on. Thank you very much. Yeah.
What I basically start, I probably would agree with you in one regard. We tend to have a very simplistic view of North Korean regime. They believe that it's something irrational, crazy, and only because they have policemen ready to shoot. Problem is you have to pay policemen. And in order to control people, you have to have a lot of police. So it's basically a question which has been asked in the 16th century, and we still have to ask, how did it come to exist? Honestly, I would avoid the word tyranny because it's emotionally charged, and because by our modern standards, pretty much 95% of the political systems, of political regimes which have existed in the world history until, say, at least the early 1900s, can be described as tyranny. Let's be more neutral. Let's say a government with an unusually strong authoritarian tendency, or dictatorship, which is individual, hereditary dictatorship, or monarchy, sort of absolute monarchy. Problem is, right now I'm working with Soviet documents of the 1950s, a lot of newly declassified stuff, some stuff which was declassified decades ago, about emergence of Kim Il-sung regime in the late 1950s. Just going to publish a seriously enlarged edition of my old book. And what is in way against striking? In 1956, well, initially it was a Stalinist regime. It was installed by the Soviet Union and was under much tougher control than many people realize. Say, if you read, I find, say, stuff which is written by the left-leaning, so-called progressive, quote-unquote, scholars in Korea, in South Korea, slightly comical, because they clearly they don't understand how toughly the North Korean state was controlled by the Soviet supervisors. Having said that, in 1956, there was a serious attempt of some people, 55, 56, among the top elite, to challenge the Soviet model. It did happen in Poland. In Poland, it was brilliant success. It did happen in Hungary. It was brilliant success. It was crushed by the Soviet tanks, but then it ended up pretty much the same as Imre Nagy wanted. There were some attempts, there was serious kind of liberalization in Bulgaria, in many other places, but not in North Korea. And you know what is a bit disconcerting? You see that Kim Il-sung model, Kim Il-sung policy triumphed because it was widely supported by the population. I understand it's not going to be a popular statement, because intellectuals who create discourse, they tend to be sort of more or less liberal, pro-democracy, not necessarily right-wing kind of liberal democracy, maybe other kind, but it's disconcerting to say that North Koreans probably did not want a more liberal state. But if you look, you see something quite clear. Majority of the officials were supporting Kim Il-sung line. They saw the liberal ideas as essentially something which was pushed on them by a foreign force, by the Russians, whom they did not particularly like. They liked them much more than, say, Japanese, but they did not like them that much anyway, like Chinese too. And they saw it as another forced import from Russia, but they accepted Stalinism, which was a forced import from Russia, and they did not accept Khrushchev-style liberal kind of more modest variety of state socialism. People who were supporting it, you don't see people from the common people, from common world. Yes, there was a great deal of discontent at the universities, at the research centers. No sign of support, even when there was a famine, and there was a minor famine in North Korea, almost completely forgotten in 1955. People did not challenge the system. So you don't see anything like Poland. You don't see anything like Hungary. And for me, explanation is Korean background. Combination of very strong nationalism, which was a result of colonial past, very bitter and very recent, and influence of the traditional pre-modern peasantry. Their ideas of, an ideal state, which was expressed, say, in Taiping Rebellion, in the ideology of Tonghak movement in Korea, in Anabaptist movement in Germany, once for a pre-modern peasantry want to have an ideal state. What do they want? They don't want republic. They want egalitarian distribution. They don't want rich people. They usually, but not always, are suspicious of people with glasses. But not always, but usually yes. They want to have a good king. They want to have bureaucratic structure. They want officials to be honest and poorly paid. And they want, but still better than them, they understand. Every good working people is working. Security state, egalitarian distribution, everybody is given 2 bowls of rice, official is getting 3 bowls of rice, and His Majesty is getting 5 bowls of rice and maybe have 2 concubines. It's how the real world should operate. And it's very consistent with all pre-modern movements in East Asia, in Europe. I'm less aware of South Asia or Middle East. So I would dare to say that initial impulse which put Kim Il-sung in power and maintained his rule was that he was, if you like, he expressed the ideas of common North Koreans. Not educated people from Waseda University or Moscow State University. Not former trade union activists, but a son, semi-literate son of a subsistence farmer who was beaten by landlord and who had some ideas which we do not necessarily like. And it's how North Korea got itself into a trap. Because maybe in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, 20 years' time, many of the people who were initially supportive would probably begin to feel uncomfortable, because they saw that the paradise of egalitarian distribution was not that nice, and actually it was not a paradise at all. But it was too late, because I think that at a certain stage, around, say, 1970, another mechanism which kept North Korean regime in operation began to become more and more powerful. First, combination of peasantry, rebellion kind of, I wouldn't call revolution, but peasantry ideology, traditional pre-modern peasantry ideology, and modern nationalism. On the second stage, class interests of the elite, because once you have an established structure, it has inertia. And around 1970, 1975, I don't pretend that I know, I think nobody can exactly name the exact year what's happened. A new elite emerged, Kanbu, who replaced Yanban. And these people had vested interest in maintaining the old system. A big difference with Eastern Europe was that in Eastern Europe, at the end of the day, after decades of working with kind of playing with state socialism, the Soviet, Polish, Hungarian, Bulgarian elite decided to jettison the old system because they were not under threat. Who is running former Soviet states right now? You know, early last year, for one of my classes, I made a bit of calculation. It has changed a bit recently, but only 3, there are 15 post-Soviet states, 15 states from the former Soviet Union. Only 3 states are run by people who are not connected with old Soviet nomenclatura. Only 3. In some cases, states are still run by people who used to run the same state under the Communist Party. Used to be, when I made my calculations. One of them died, another retired. Resigned recently. Retired. Sort of. I'm not sure whether Mr. Nazarbayev actually retired. Nobody knows. But let's say officially he's retired now. Having said that, what's happened? They did pretty much what Chinese did. It was more complicated, but you know, when the Chinese elite discovered that the red cat was not catching mice, they kicked the red cat out, they took a white cat, yes, and painted it white. So capitalism, cutthroat capitalism in China, wrapped in this nice red stuff. Same happened essentially in the Soviet state, in Eastern European. We can go into details, we can basically use Schelling classification about capitalism from below, from above, from outside, but essentially what was important in the Soviet Union, in Eastern Europe, elite understood. If they surrender the communist system, for the want of better word, I'm not sure whether it's the right expression, say Soviet-style state socialist system, they will still remain at top. Not as party secretaries, but as entrepreneurs, business people, democratic politicians. It's not the case in North Korea, because there is South Korea, and it's so increasingly powerful and increasingly successful. So there is when people are talking now seriously about peaceful unification, it makes me laugh. Because for any North Korean leader, any member of North Korean elite, everybody at the top, say 500,000 people in North Korea, negotiated agreement with South Korea is suicidal because they will be pushed aside. They don't have economic power, and they will lose political power. And it's not the case as it has been in many other countries, when you just jettison the ideology and you tell, hello guys, ladies and gentlemen, I have always been a closet Democrat. Vote for me. It's not going to work in North Korea, because closet Democrat will come from Seoul on a tank of South Korean army, or maybe armed forces of the United States of America. And these people understand it, they understand they have no option, and they remain very determined to stay, and you know, when elite is united, it stays. Finally, 1 minute, we have a new coming elite, bourgeoisie, new rising bourgeois class in North Korea. And many say, wow, Tongju, lots of money, U4, they are going to get rid of the system. No. I also used to believe it. My wife, who is a Korean specialist, and one of my best, actually the best Korean student, who is also, of course, obviously Korean specialist, said, you are right, wrong. And then I began to talk to Tongju, partially here, partially in China, and I began to see that I was wrong, my wife was right. Because these people, the new emerging people, masters of money, lots of money, the new rich, which have begun to emerge in 20 years, they also don't want revolution. Because revolution is bad for business, unlike, say, black market operators in Poland or Hungary. Because first, and much more important, they understand that revolution will bring not so much South Korean tanks, they don't necessarily afraid of, but Samsung and Hyundai and LG. And they cannot compete with South Korean business. Because for them, and they increasingly understand it, not all, I understand, not all, some people do. Because my favorite description of current policy, reforms without openness, was not coined by me. I stole it, plagiarized it, from a very smart North Korean businesswoman who said, political reforms, yes. More freedom to make money, yes. More market, yes. Political reforms, no way. We don't need it. We don't want to be as free as China. China is hectic, chaotic, and risky. In our country, divided country, I don't want regime collapse. And it's, by the way, some North Korean officials did tell me something along the same line. And their officials understand that they're in the same boat with the new bourgeoisie. So we had popular movement, which produced elite. This elite began to sustain the system because they have no exit option. We have new elite, which have absolutely different background, different source of income, different everything, but they also want to keep regime in place. So it doesn't mean revolution will not happen. Revolutions do happen. And in the long run, I think it will happen, and I'm not sure whether I'm happy about it. Because it's going to be bloody, messy, and very, very painful. It's still highly likely. But right now, we have elite in North Korea, old elite, and new elite, who are determined to stay in power no matter what. It began as a popular movement, and now we have a system which is supported maybe by minority, but determined, well organized, and what was of all, cornered. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's my great pleasure to come here to read and then discuss in your papers. And I would like to also thank the Seogang University and Professor Im to invite me as a discussant. And I've got so many ideas actually in my mind, but actually I learned a lot from two papers, and also I don't have any kind of disagreement at all. I mean, basically, I agree in the most of a point, but I just want to discuss a couple of further issue we may need to think about. In order to get into my point, probably I need to introduce myself a little bit because I'm a sociologist, and I'm working in the University of North Korean Studies, which is a very strange name, I know. But my university is the only kind of offer in interdisciplinary studies focusing on North Korea. So it's my colleagues, but most of them they're majoring in political science and then economic, and sociologists only me and another person. So it's just, you could say that it's sociology, such as a kind of a minor area. In the study of North Korea, in at least the Korean academic. The reason is that is probably we just want to see the states. I mean, we understand the North Korea as a state. And as you could see that the both paper, of course, is sociologists and then the historian, but we are talking about the future of the state, whether the state is going to be like that or end of stage or not, the collapse of states, etc., etc. So it's our perspective is probably only focused on the nation, especially for the North Korea. But my perspective is more kind of agency level and the people's level, and how people live and their everyday lives and change of their society and culture, and etc., etc. And this the issue of the end of North Korean state is being there for such a long time. We have all different expectations and ideas and assumptions. Some people said it's death of Kim Il-sung, meaning the end of the state, and the later Kim Jong-il and the death of Kim Jong-un, meaning that it's the end of the state. But now we are having the third leader, Kim Jong-un, and it seems that he's been pretty stable. He's working very hard, and also the economic condition seems to be okay, despite of these international sanctions. But North Korean economy is still very stable, and their food situation looks kind of okay. So we have to ask in that kind of question, how come we always looking at this very state level, and also we understand North Korea as same as the Kim's regime and Kim's family. I guess in this kind of questions is basically we have two approach to tackle. The first one is probably the structural level. We're just looking at the structure. And, the couple of academics are talking about the corporatism or the partisan system. And some people even talking about the military first policies. I mean, these kind of policies or certain kind of peculiar system sustaining North Korean society and North Korea as a state. But this kind of arguments, although North Korea is not great country at all, especially for the people's perspective, human rights issues and violence and pressures and all those stuff. But in state level, it seems very stable for the last 70 years, from the beginning of the 1950s, and then 2017, so in over 70 years, the state level is very successful, which is very unusual. This is kind of big puzzle we just try to figure out. International pressures, and also the North Korea went through such a dreadful famine. So, approximately 2 million people lost their lives because of the famine and food shortages and during the arduous march in the end of 1990s and beginning of 2000. And also, the Juche ideologies can be understood in that way. Juche ideology is such a successful political ideology, sustaining the state and also the combining people together. So it's working as a one team. And decolonization is, of course, in the very important issues. And the states use these decolonization processes and this sort of like threat of imperial powers as the biggest problem of the society and the nation, so that the nation as a one team, you have to work hard, you have to be together, etc., etc. But that kind of argument doesn't really have people at all. I mean, we assume that the people as a one team, and also we don't see that any historical change of the people. I mean, that's the issue of the sociology. I mean, the sociologists even studying the North Korea, but we're still talking about the only state level. I mean, we don't meet people. I mean, because of the division system, it's very hard to meet the North Korean people and how they think and how they feel. What kind of effect they have, what kind of everyday life they have. It's very hard to get the information. Of course, we do have the North Korean migrants and North Korean defectors in South Korea, but they are kind of, they do have a different narrative as well, because they are migrants and they spend long time in China, so that they have different understandings. And when they arrive in South Korea, they have the political kind of position that they have to, have very hostile kind of, understanding of North Korea, and et cetera, et cetera. But we could get a bit of the evidence as well. I do conduct a couple of research in China. For example, North Korean migrants. Some of them are illegal migrants, and some of the legal migrants, and some of the factory workers. They change massively in last couple of years. I mean, probably the last decade. And because of their everyday life is being changed, and their understanding of the leader, their understanding of regime is being changed quite a lot. So these people is not just one, but they are historically embedded, but historically being changed radically. And of course, because of their market and because of their everyday lives. So these are kind of points we need to really looking at. But even the two papers talking about in different way, different perspective to tackle. But I guess it's the both work is assumed that this North Korean is still probably doesn't really have much information or much knowledge, so that they don't really know what's really going on, so that they are voluntarily subjugated by the states. But the Professor Han already mentioned that I'm not quite sure about this voluntary subjugation, the idea of the voluntary. And when we talk about the voluntary, then it meaning that it's kind of assuming that North Koreans do not have much information, or they are completely blinded or brainwashed. But it's my understanding is not that simple. I mean, they some of them have far better ideas. Or some of them is probably still brainwashed, or some of them still blinded a lot. But they do have so many different spectrum among the North Korean people. So we need to bring in their cases in order to contextualize the real situation of the North Korea. Otherwise, we could just always predict the future of the states in all the time. So we need to make a more kind of specific argument and more empirical work as well. So I just want to ask the Dr. Dayez-Burgeon about this voluntary, the idea of the voluntary. How could we make it more specified and more contextualized in terms of in North Korea? And it's related to the Professor Han's work. I think I really enjoy in his papers, and also you talk about the modernization and delayed modernizations and more fragmented type of the modernization. It's not just linear process, right? It's, of course, the latecomers also, they do have a rather bumpy line of modernization, but in North Korean case, it's even I guess, more complicated because of these very central ideas and Juche ideologies and decolonizations, and this history is very complicated, and so on and so forth. So we need to see that is how this type of processes is kind of change their everyday lives and also change the political system. And I would say that there are two possibilities, as you said. The first one is probably reinforcing the state, like Trump, digital media does not really provide the better freedom, Brexit as well. Digital media is being used, kind of mobilizing people to very right-wing or the ultra-right-wing view, so making just like sort of binary kind of view, that could be possible. So that, in meaning that is the digital drive does not really affect North Korean state or does not really affect in North Korean society. But on the other hand, this digital, meaning that it's not only just change of the medium, right? Digital is change of your lifestyle completely, the way you think, the way you live, right? Then how could North Korean people practice this digital? We don't really know. I mean, that's the question I have to really tackle, and I have to meet in more people. But the one thing I could really say that is North Koreans, their life is far ahead than we expect. That's something I learned from my interview with the North Koreans, and then their idea of the capitalism and their idea of the market is very revolutionary in this. But I'm not really believe in this new bourgeoisies, as you mentioned. It's like new bourgeoisies probably they could be very rich, but they are heavily,
yes,
related to the state.
They are in the same boat, and they accept the domination of Kangu.
Yeah. But then, again, this bourgeoisie, if they do have the political struggle within that group, right? We assume that bourgeoisie is just one group and then one goal, but there could be, the more fragmented way to operate even this one class. So there are so many other factors we have to consider. So voluntary subjugation, such an interesting concept, and for me, it's at least kind of bringing the new perspective. A lot of my colleagues in political scientists, they were just talking about the political system and party, military, so on and so forth. But you kind of open a new idea, a new angle to see the people. But I want to hear something more about empirical aspects, and otherwise we may have rather oversimplified kind of understanding of this very complex group of people. Okay, I will stop here my discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone? Nigel, you want? Okay.
Well, Thomas, it's really a question to Professor Lankov rather than I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said, but I think you need to flesh out the East German case, because the East Germans saw the West Germans from the 1970s just like the North Koreans saw the South Koreans. And yet the change in Germany is very similar to the change elsewhere in Eastern Europe. So, I mean, on the other hand, the change in East Germany did not come at all voluntarily, or at least much less voluntarily than anywhere else, because it was triggered by the Hungarians letting the East Germans out. But it's, I mean, you're painting a picture of a sort of a new elite from the 70s onwards that is very much entrenched and would not reform, whereas in East Germany that didn't actually happen.
250,000 Soviet troops.
Yeah.
The largest group of Soviet tanks near every party committee building. I put it in less kind of flowery way. East German elite was never even remotely as autonomous as North Korean elite. North Korean elite deliberately destroyed physically, occasionally it meant torturing to death, usually just comfortable death in exile or in mine, pro-Soviet forces in the 1960s. You were too close to the Russians, you would be dead, unless you were running fast enough to the Russian border. So it was not the case in Germany. East German elite relied too much on the Russian tanks, and they had no choice. And these people were quite autonomous. And the level of nationalism was far, far greater. Germans got burned with their nationalism in 1939, 1945, and even German right is a bit cautious about this. It's not the case in Korea, even here.
Yes, Yang-jun.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question to Pascal Dayez-Burgeon. Actually, I visited over 10 times to North Korea, so, because I am a doctor, and I have experienced the discuss of these related issues with my North Korean friends. If my North Korean friends are here, I think they totally disagree with your idea. I thought, how they respond to your presentations. During this presentation, I think they definitely similar response to your presentation. First, our political system, our North Korean political system is the inevitable choice to protect our people from imperialism of the United States. If we do not choose this kind of political system and this kind of political behavior, our North Korea disappeared and will disappear like Libya and like other countries. I think very similar response and questions in North Korea, many North Koreans. So I would like to know your ideas, such kind of North Korean ideas. I would like to know your answers to such kind of thought of North Korea.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, then will you respond to this first round of questions?
Me?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you very much. For the question of the will or the voluntary subjugation, I think there are two things to say. First, Lavoisier wrote before Freud, so which means for him, volonté, will, is the consciousness and unconsciousness all together. He cannot even imagine that you do something without willing it. And that's the reason why at the time when the Christians were in power, you can judge someone for doing something he doesn't exactly want, because if he's not responsible because he's idiot or stupid or weak or manipulated, whatever, if you do, you're a criminal. That's, I think, the philosophy of the time. So it doesn't, for him, will means what you do. Now maybe we won't say volonté, we won't say will, we say maybe action or attitude, conscious and unconscious first. But also I think what I didn't present it, what is suggested also, how can you reject dictatorship, is just refuse it by somehow pacific action. He's a bit the predecessor of Gandhi or William Thoreau. He suggested just if you refuse dictatorship, it won't work. If you don't believe, everything stops and it won't work. I don't know if it's naive or not. Actually, people say to Gandhi that it's totally naive, but at the end it kind of works in India. So he's adept of the pacific and passive resistance. And so I think for him, not to refuse is to will. That's voluntary subjugation is people, as soon as you don't refuse the dictatorship, you want it. That's the way you have to understand it. And the fact is that many current people, maybe they don't like But they don't refuse. I mean, they don't do anything to refuse. There is some movement, there is some vague period of resistance, but very few. And now, unless I'm not informed, there is no real opposition party. We heard about that weird Cholima civic defense group making action in Spain. This is a joke. I mean, so in that perspective, if you don't want to demonstrate and to be against, you want the system. That's the way you are, and you have to interpret it. But of course, there are many different types of adhesion, acceptance. Some people they really accept, some people they are fanatic nationalists, and some people they just don't care and they let things go. But even in the perspective of voluntary subjugation, if they don't do anything, they accept it. Maybe the only one who refuse are the refugee, they leave. But the question is, why they leave? I have some contact, of course less than you, and with people who leave. Their answer is always twisted. For me, they are twisted for two reasons. First, because Korean politeness leads you to twist your answer. Always. You always want to please the people who ask a question. The example I always give to my French friend, if you ask to any Korean, what is your religion? And I can see in their brain, he's French, he must be Catholic. So to make him happy, I will say I'm Catholic. So I'm good Catholic. And I say, but actually I'm German. Oh, actually I'm more Protestant. So I'm afraid that the refugee, when actually they are either Protestant, Catholic, or maybe atheist. Most of them actually they are atheists. I like the guy who answered to me, my religion, ask my wife. I think the refugee, they tell us what we want to hear. They tell us what we want to hear. Very often, I don't have much an experiment I didn't do on the basic research basic thing, but how can I have a testimony also? Of course, there is no way to imagine in any other dream life to meet any of the leaders, and even though I meet, how can I write anything about them? It's impossible. But I was fortunate enough to contact with 3 of his French doctors. I cannot give the name because he refused. Well, it's not that difficult to find. He get joined, get cured for his ankle, and he says something to me like, "Why me?" Because no doctor dare to touch the body. They're terrified by the idea of touching the body. So I said, why? They're terrified to go to prison or whatever if they fail? No. It's the holy body. It's not exactly God. It's horribly difficult to imagine to touch the holy body of the leader. So that's why he asked a French doctor to come. And maybe I think he's totally lying. No, he showed me a picture on his smartphone with his son on the knee of Kim Jong-un. So they meet, and he quite was interested by theory of voluntary subjugation because he met many people and they are critical, and sometimes they're mocking the system, whatever, but whatever they like it. They somehow they want to have it because they like. I don't know, it's because they think it's protected, it's also because they're used to it, because they like the way it works, because having the opportunity of maybe meeting the chair where Chang Dun-il sat, it's already extraordinary. So I'm sure that what I say is totally irrefutable. I never say I have any will, and I'm sure the North Korean won't be happy. But when I spoke with North Korean, I never said that kind of thing to them. I never say you are totally submissive to a phantasm, you are crazy, whatever. I never say something like that. I just say, how does it work? And I say, I like Korea. Actually, I met you ambassador in France. You know, there is no embassy in France, but there is an embassy to UNESCO. So there is an embassy. But the ambassador is Mr. Kim. He speaks perfectly French. He was invited to one of my lectures and said, no, he will be far behind, don't bother. So I talked, and of course it was just in front of me, like one picture with his colleague and the other colleagues. I was very embarrassing. Didn't disagree, said, no, this is an interesting vision, and it's not totally fake, but you forgot that we are very critical, and we don't like, and there's something which doesn't work, but also some answer was very weird, like, you mock monarchy, but finally other countries have monarchy too, and in America the son succeeds to the father, is the same. So always a bit twisted answer. It defeats the good sense somehow. I think they are smart enough to adjust to the system and to find answers smart and cultivated and intelligent, because they are, which albeit comfort them to accept which is unacceptable, because what you say is we need to do that, to have a system which protects us from America. Okay, but do they need to have some kind of sacred leader like this? That's less sure. Maybe they need to be protected from the invasion of America or South Korea, I think.
Okay.
But
Now, you suggest the four kind of way of looking at voluntary subjugation. But she and I somehow agree that it has something to do with how people think, act, feel. This exactly. It's not the characteristic of objective characteristic of a system. No, it has nothing to do. The voluntary subjugation means how people think, how people act, how people feel in their mind, how people judge. This is related action. But somehow you suggest the four criteria, but without, except habit. Habit is something our habit, okay. But other criteria, pyramidal tyranny, or what is it? Another one, dictatorship show, somehow suggest kind of observational statement. Okay, oh, the dictator show is there, pyramidal power structure is there. This is very much observational statement from external observer, rather than going inside of the heart and mind, the feeling, whatever, emotion of the people. So this classification, I think, is relying too much on 16th century, the beginner of your idea. Too much, but I think if we want to talk about voluntary subjugation of North Korea, I feel that it may be much better to use this reference as a starting point and move more to contemporary argument, maybe starting from Weber and the whole kind of argument related to how people think and act in their everyday life, and without relating yourself to this domain, then there may be some kind of misunderstanding. And it is very funny that I observe his question. If we use voluntary subjugation, his friend, he said his friend will reject your thesis. Now, because you talk about, well, North Korea is just, tyranny, dictator, something like that, in your speech here. But if you talk about the voluntary subjugation, that means somehow people accept it, right? Yeah. You said, just they accept it without raising any question. That's what you call voluntary subjugation, okay? That's a minimum criteria, I think. Then your friend, I don't think your friend will reject this idea. Yes, voluntary subjugation, yes, we do. Yeah. We just accept it. We don't ask any, doubt about that, okay? If there's no opposition forces, no critique visible, then it is really difficult for people to raise up, to stand up, to criticize. So, as you said, they just accept it without doing anything. That is a starting point of the argument, but it is just a factor. But if we have to go beyond that in order to say how really people think, act, feel, something like that. That is my observation. And your idea, I learned, it is a very interesting observation. You somehow suggest about the emerging, so to speak, bourgeois.
Yeah, yes.
And I got the impression that for them, if I understand you correctly, their choice, okay, they welcome everything, market, but they don't accept the idea of revolution. They just keep the power still going on.
Yes.
That's your idea.
Yes.
Then in this case, the acceptance of power, authority is, I think, is a rational choice for them.
Yes. Yes.
It's a rational choice for them.
Yes,
okay?
because they lived in a greenhouse. They like a palm tree in a greenhouse. You break a greenhouse, you die.
Yeah, so that provides another explanation. What is going on? Why people accept it? One idea. Well, it is a rational choice. for certain category of people who is emerging, so-called middle class, they really welcome any change, but they don't accept any political change at all because it will destroy their own power actually. That is your point. So in this case, there's rational choice explanation one thing. Your voluntary subjugation, that's also another very interesting perspective. So, but concerning your idea, okay, now.
So can you make it shorter?
Oh, okay, just maybe see.
I want to collect some more questions.
Okay,
So.
yeah. Well, okay, I think you know, we share many things together, and you said, okay, digital drive is going on, there's a state level and everyday life level. Okay, you make a distinction of these two levels, and somehow you seem to suggest that that kind of gap is already there, and it may grow over time, and then it will maybe make some change, I think, you know, everyday life as a political system. Okay. So that is very interesting kind of possibility and perspective. Maybe we can talk later about this further. Okay.
Actually, that's the point that I wanted to address, I think. And this discussion reminds me very much of discussions that we've had about other dictatorships. My own field of research is the Nazi regime. And there, a very important contribution came from the discussion of everyday life. So I'm very sympathetic to your intervention. And one of the themes there that we've seen historically in the case of other dictatorships was the question of whether there is space for people simply to evade state power. The image that we have, and I know very little about North Korea, but the image that we have of the North Korean dictatorship is precisely that this regime is almost uniquely effective in invading private life. But I'd be interested to hear how far that image is correct.
Who knows how much did they invade into the private life, right? I mean, okay, you may have something to say, Sung-kyung, right? Yeah.
I think their everyday life is same as any other places. Of course, they do have the stronger the state interventions, and they do have organizational lives, and they do have the education and media being controlled and limited. But they have their own spaces, right? And they do talk about the leader, they do talk about the politics and state, and they do talk about South Korea and the current situations. So in their space of the private spaces being more widely open in these days because of the digitalizations and then more information from outside. So we cannot have only one kind of image of the North Koreans' everyday life. I mean, one of my example I could probably give is North Korean defectors and also North Korean mobilities. We all know that these North Koreans cannot really move around. But my interview is saying that they do move around. They can always move around. There is a space that they can move to a different city for the trading business, or they could even cross the border to work there for 6 months and 1 year and coming back to North Korea. I mean, that's kind of interesting, right? So we do consider in that kind of different aspects of their lives in North Korea.
And then, could I follow that up? Because then again, thinking of the model that the historical model that I bring to this, that the fact of those spaces can be interpreted either as a space in which opposition might grow, or as something that suppresses, that blunts opposition, or even that individuals see as something that has been given them by the regime. So again, I don't know whether how you might read that.
Yeah, of course, it's like, there is a possibility.
All of them, yes. All of these in London. Yeah.
But just today's discussion reminds me of the old debates on the mass dictatorship. One of my friends who was a left-wing intellectual said to me, confessed to me privately, "Oh, Ji-hyun, if you talk about the Maoist regime and North Korean regime as mass dictatorship, it's okay for him because, you know, this is good dictatorship which can really, should enjoy the support from below, right? It's left-wing dictatorship. But when you are talking about Park Chung-hee as a mass dictatorship, I can't agree to your idea of mass dictatorship of Park Chung-hee. So it's a very much, how can I say, it's all debates on mass dictatorship was divided into camps. If I'm a left-wing, okay, the Maoism or Stalinism, even the North Korea as mass dictatorship, okay, because it's a dictatorship with massive support. But you are talking about the Park Chung-hee and Hitler as a mass dictatorship, I can't accept this. Because these bad dictators enjoy the massive support? No. There was one. The second aspect is when we are talking of consent in the dictatorial regimes, we could find quite a multi-layeredness of consent. For example, very enthusiastic support, or very passive conformity, and also a internalized domination or forced domination. Quite a lot of layers of domination and subjugation and self-mobilization and so on. So, I mean, these people's response, especially from the viewpoint of agency or from the viewpoint from below, the concept itself is very much plural. Yeah. And also domination is very plural, subjugation is very plural. So every case in the certain aspects, certain context, looks different.
And right? Also, I just want to mention that the state policy has been changed rapidly in the last decades as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are something they are responding to the people's changing their everyday lives. And the North Korean people, they do now rely on the markets, and they do have a completely kind of dual life set. One is front stage, and then the other is backstage. So they do have a dual life in these days. So then the North Korean state should accept and respond in their policies of people's desires. So they kind of, allow more market and public, open the market as well. And then the economic system has been changed and all those stuff. So we have to think about this sort of like very dynamic relationship between the people and the states.
But I would like to tell an anecdote which will maybe shock you, but I don't know if you're aware, but actually I'm working in Brussels to present the Center Health, my institution, to the European communities, and of course everybody is puzzled. Nobody understands what's happening with the Brexit, and it's dramatic. And even now we have seriously scholars from London, actually the provost of the Imperial College, who said to me, "What is the Queen waiting to put Boris Johnson in the Tower?" Which means power is also a patriarchal figure. Of course, Elizabeth II is not a tyrann, but she has no power whatsoever, poor old lady who's 93 years old. But anyway, the English, they are so confused that now they say, she has to do something. And Boris Johnson has to go to jail because he lied to the Queen. So what? He lied to the Queen. Anyway. And I think
it's okay to lie to vote, but not with Your Majesty.
Yeah, you cannot lie to Your Majesty. And I think somehow in North Korea, if you put aside the horrible fascist aspect, there's also something like this. The leader is the good leader, and there's a problem in the government is because of the mean ministers who have to be fired. But the leader is always bringing the justice. It's a bit, Sejong visiting village, whatever, and that's also part of the. Somehow for the British, it's incredible subjugation. Why they think that old lady will do anything? I mean, I have all respect for her, but so it's the same. It's the
she has the ultimate power.
But this phenomenon is very common for exactly the force which I personally believe put Kim Il-sung regime at place initially. That is traditional farmers. They didn't like young barn or knights or gentry or landlords, but they loved the monarch.
The king, absolutely.
Yes, the king is always a good king. Everywhere. It's very traditional peasants type of way of thinking.
The king is always the good king, and the servant always bad.
I have one question to Andrei. I'm a little bit interested in the transnational flow of ideas in the socialist bloc. While I was working on the Polish materials in 1954-55, I found the interesting word national nihilism. National nihilism. 민족 허무주의. And then I found that 민족 허무주의 in 1956 in North Korea.
Soviet borrowing from Russian. Official Stalin's Russian of the late 1940s.
Then Russia was first.
You know, I feel sorry. I'm 56. In 10 years, 20 years, my generation will disappear. We are the only generation who read not on Sinmun and understand that they are reading poor translation from official Russian of the 1950s. I open not on Sinmun now. I read Sasol, official piece, and I see that it's poorly translated Russian idioms from the official Soviet jargon. Every second line. I even wanted to write an article just to no, it's not here. I was even beginning to collect material, then I decided probably I'm not linguist, I'm not trained. 15 years time, 20 years, my generation is dead, or have mental problems, and we are gone, and the younger generation don't get it. Even in Russia, they don't get it, because they will not force-feed with this stuff.
You mean that already in 1940s?
In this case, nationalный nihilism. It's from late 1940s. It's an official Soviet parlance of the 1940s.
Okay, that's interesting.
Anti-cosmopolitan.
But North Korea has used that term in order to refute against the Khrushchev reform. So the big difference between North Korea and the other Poland or Hungary in 1956 lies in that nationalism was combined in Poland and Hungary with a reformist trend, right? Anti-Stalin. But in NK, totally oppositely, it was nationalism combined with the Stalinist, certain...
Its problem was East Asian communist states. Because it's also the same in China. Everywhere you had the problem that nationalism was basically Polish people saw communist government as an occupation puppet force, and they were, say, 50 to 95% right. But it's not the case in North Korea. People did not, even if Soviets started it, because back in the 50s, it's a tragedy of Koreans, I would say, nationalism, support for dictatorship, and traditional thinking, they infused together. While in Poland it was always a destructive force.
56 October was a really totally
By the way,
different
same was to some extent in Russia. One of my favorite Russian poets, 15 years ago, wrote a very interesting, just 2 lines. The West has won my war. Because he was quite liberal, pro-democratic. But it was a war against my country. It's a very good problem. It's a very good expression of the problem. Even Russian people very often face.
That's interesting.
Well, if we have time available, what do we?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any...
No, I mean,
so we have 10 more minutes.
Yeah, we talked about voluntary subjugation, but the final part of the paper is what can we expect in the future. So it is, of course, it related to voluntary subjugation, but it somehow shows his own observation of the future of Korea. So why don't we talk about his idea?
Okay, then Pascal, can you summarize it in a couple of minutes?
In the last part, it's still a very important part, but he didn't say anything about it.
That's right, but that's right if you want, but something has been said already that we have, the media say that the situation is difficult for North Korea. They have to, they actually want to change, and that's why they are begging Donald Trump to change things. And I'm not exactly sure. I don't know who said that, but you say actually the meeting with Donald Trump was a huge victory for the Kim Jong-un. So I think that
everybody knows that.
So
it's common sense.
Yeah, but it's not exactly so. It's common sense. And the rest of it, I'm not exactly sure. He exactly wants to change. So many people say, "Oh, he changed many things," but it makes me think about that sentence in that famous Italian novel happening in Sicily in 1860, when the prince of the hero is a prince of a Sicilian kingdom. At the time, when Sicily was a kingdom, and that kingdom is absorbed by the kingdom of Italy, which is modern, and the kingdom of Sicily is supposed to be archaic. And he said, if you want nothing to change, everything has to change. So I have the impression that it's what's happening in North Korea. They change everything, but nothing changed actually. It's a bit done. The second is that the moment is not very good because I'm not exactly sure that the democracy is such an appealing regime for the moment. And somehow, what I said here, and I forgot to say that, but it's not a problem for Korea, it's a problem for France. It's Islam. What Islam means? Subjugation. So part of debate in our country, like 10% or 12% of people are voluntarily subjugated to something which is deliberately anti-democratic. So it's a huge problem for France, and actually not only for France, for all the regions who believe in Islam. They're voluntary for the case, like really they say they want, precisely, do they really want? All Islamics, of course, I want to respect Allah, I'm not exactly sure, but they want. So all the women have veils. It's really terrible now what we experiment in some region in Paris is like is an Islamic country, and I'm not mentioning Belgium, which is even worse. So I think for the moment the tyranny is a bit fashionable. So it's not, and I'm not exactly, of course, Donald Trump is a democratic president a democratically elected for a democratic regime, and he is supposed to give power when he finishes his term. I think he will. But the way of talking and using the communication is not very democratic. So I think Kim Jong-un has a bit is not an isolated tyrann in the ocean of democracy. It's more tyrann. Maybe trying to create a mecca of dictatorship. I mean, some Sainte Alliance, as we say, of dictatorship. That's what Kim Il-sung wants to do, I think. And what can be done, that's really is a question. I would be stupid if I give any advice to anyone about the situation. That would be totally presumptuous. But as I have the chance to be sitting next to a person who participates to the Sunshine Policy, I really think that intellectually, morally, I don't think we have any other option. We have to keep dialoguing with North Korea, whatever they do. Okay, you send rocket to make bomb, whatever. Still keep dialoguing with you because we have this. You are, am I not? I'm not unhappily the same people, and that's the only way is to initiate maybe in your country the will to be free, but imposing liberty in North Korea will never work. I think you cannot impose liberty to anyone. It doesn't work. They have to will. They have to desire it. How can we make desire of liberty to North Korea? It's very difficult.
Okay. So is there anyone who wants to raise some question and comment?
What I think is an open question. How to interpret? He's saying nothing changes, but everything has to change. That's very much Chinese. All the Chinese way down to Lao Tzu kind of expression. Everything has to change, but nothing changes. What does it really
nothing
mean?
has to change.
So maybe nothing means political system, maybe.
Yeah. The political power
must stay there, but except political system, everything has to change it. That kind of image I got from your presentation. I don't know whether it's a good presentation.
It's not my idea. Of course, it's a very famous, incredible novel.
That expression. When we applied it to North Korea, what that really means.
Yeah. So if we finish, we can finish by Lincoln, no? we can fool the people some of the time. You can fool some of the people all the time. But you cannot fool all the people all the time. So maybe one day, maybe.
But the real problem with the modern dictatorship lies in that all the dictators are always referring people's will,
Yes.
right? But that's I thought it's very problematic, this idea by the ruling party of people's hearing instead of parliament hearing, right? Of course, these parliament opposition party guys are terrible, poor guys, but instead of hearing in the parliament, when they propose people's hearing, it's a one-way step toward the dictatorship. Because democracy is the second worst system, right? It's not the best system, but in order to maintain the second worst system, we need to respect sort of institutional safeguards. But once we began to disregard the institutional safeguard one by one, That's the the way that Hitler actually took to consolidate his dictatorship. So I mean, the dictatorship is not far from the people's will. Very often, or almost of all cases, dictators or dictatorship has been based on people's will.
But then that comments probably linked to the digital drive. Because in these days, like new media, new digital world, we don't really trust this kind of democratic institution level. Right? It's people would like to express in their political view directly. So it has a high possibility of, the rise of the populist. Whether it's right or left. So this is kind of big questions, right?
Yeah, sure. Very substantial question. It's not a technical question, right? It's a very substantial one.
Most North Korean I met want peace and prosperity than liberty. And yeah, it's very important thing. So they want peace first, and they want prosperity than liberty. And they more want to let them alone than support from other country. Yeah, they just want to stop the sanction. They want to stop the peace. They want to stop any military training to invade North Korea. It's just what they want.
But Young-jun, could be generational differences. I mean, yesterday this Meari Aktan, a lady, she talked of 유학 탈북. So because these now refugees are doing refugee, not from because they are starving, but they have no freedom in North Korea to choose whatever he wants. What he wants. So she used the term of 유학 탈북. I was really surprised to hear that.
Like poor liberty. Yeah, maybe they don't like.
No, I mean, if you have a look at the history of, for example, communist country in Eastern Europe, in 1980s, the most dissatisfactory fact among the young Poles was that they could not choose their profession.
I expect the Professor Kim, most the reason why the North Korean defect from North and South is due to the prosperity and the liberty. What is the more proportion? I think most of them the prosperity. That is the main reason, not liberty.
But she says that nowadays a change.
Only small portion.
Change.
Yes, liberty.
Yeah, but the problem is that Napoleon said, the revolution was a mistake. They fight for liberty, but what they want is equality. They don't care about liberty. So that's a dictator always say like that.
I just say to the voice from North Korea. It's not our voice. It's introduce their voice. What is the real?
But Young, I'm not sure. If they spoke very frankly to you, what they have thought in mind, sometimes it's also in a sense of decorated wording or calculated wording. So if we have this everyday history approach, we need to be very careful. So you know well about this some dangers trapped in this. This is witnessing, also interviews. But anyways, it's a long discussion that they can have no solution. So then shall we close session today? I thank you very much to speakers and discussants, and also these participants from the floor for their contribution to making this case a very, very lively discussion point. Thank you very much.